This story that seemed impossible actually happened to me. I was so shocked when it happened. Let me tell you about it. Come along with me as we begin. I grew up in a house where comparisons were the daily language. My parents always saw me as the failed child, while my older brother was their shining star. For years, they told everyone at family gatherings that I lived off handouts and could not take care of myself. But on my wedding day, when my groom Marcus took the microphone, everything changed. The truth finally came out, and nobody in that room could believe what they heard. Before we dive into this journey, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If stories about overcoming family struggles touch your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I need to take you back to a small town in Ohio, where I spent my childhood. Our house was a 2-story building with faded blue shutters and a front lawn that my father kept perfectly trimmed. From the outside, we looked like the ideal American family, but inside those walls, a different story unfolded every single day. My father, Harold, worked as an accountant for a local manufacturing company. He left for work at 7:30 every morning and came home at 6:15 every evening. His routine never changed in 20 years. My mother, Diane, worked part-time as an administrative assistant at the elementary school. She valued appearances above almost everything else. What the neighbors thought, what the relatives whispered, what the church members observed. These things mattered more to her than the feelings of her own children. Then there was my brother Derek. He was 4 years older than me, and from the moment I could form memories, I understood that Derek was special in ways I could never be. He played basketball on the varsity team as a sophomore. He made honor roll every single semester. Teachers sent home glowing reports about his leadership potential. Our relatives called him the golden child, and my parents never corrected them. The living room wall told the story of our family better than any words could. Derek's trophies lined the top shelf of the display cabinet. His certificates hung in matching frames across the main wall. His basketball jersey from the state championship game was mounted in a shadow box. And somewhere in the corner, barely visible, sat my spelling bee participation ribbon from 4th grade. That was the only achievement of mine that made it onto display. I was not a troubled kid. I earned decent grades, mostly A's and B's. I never got in trouble at school. I helped with chores without being asked twice, but I was quiet. I preferred reading books in my room to playing sports outside. I loved drawing and writing stories in my journal. These were not interests my parents understood or valued. When I was 10 years old, I discovered my passion for art. I would spend hours sketching characters from my imagination and creating entire worlds on paper. My middle school art teacher, Mrs. Patterson, told me I had genuine talent. She encouraged me to develop my skills and consider art school someday. I rushed home that day, excited to share her words with my parents. My mother barely looked up from the dishes. She said that art was a nice hobby, but I needed to focus on real subjects. My father grunted from behind his newspaper and asked if Derek had called about his internship interview. That was the end of that conversation. When I was 12, something happened that I have never forgotten. Our county held an annual creative writing contest for students. I spent 3 weeks crafting a short story about a girl who discovers she can communicate with birds. I poured my heart into every sentence. When the results came in, I won 2nd place out of over 200 entries from the entire county. I ran home that afternoon clutching my certificate and the small trophy they gave the top 3 winners. My heart was pounding with excitement. Finally, I thought I had done something worth celebrating. My mother, Diane, took the certificate from my hands and glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds. She said that 2nd place was nice, but reminded me that Derek won 1st place in the state math competition that same year. Then she went back to preparing dinner, as if I had shown her a grocery receipt. I stood there in the kitchen holding my trophy, feeling something crack inside my chest. I walked slowly to my room and closed the door. I cried for an hour that evening. I cried not because I wanted 1st place, but because I realized that no matter what I accomplished, it would never be enough. I would always be measured against Derek, and I would always fall short. This pattern repeated throughout my teenage years. Every report card, every school event, every family dinner became an opportunity for comparison. Derek was applying to prestigious universities. Derek landed a summer internship at a Fortune 500 company. Derek graduated summa cum laude. And what was I doing? According to my parents, I was still that dreamy girl who did not know what she wanted from life. The worst moments came during family gatherings. Our extended family met for holidays at my grandmother's house. Aunts, uncles, and cousins crowded into her living room for Thanksgiving and Christmas. These should have been happy occasions. Instead, they became showcases for my inadequacy. My mother would parade Derek around the room, introducing his latest accomplishments to anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, she would answer questions about me with dismissive waves of her hand. She would say that Zoe was still figuring things out, or she would mention that Zoe liked to draw little pictures, as if my portfolio of artwork was the equivalent of doodling in the margins of a notebook. I learned to become invisible at these gatherings. I helped my grandmother in the kitchen. I played with the younger cousins in the backyard. I found corners where I could disappear until it was time to go home. Being invisible felt safer than being seen and found lacking. By the time I reached my senior year of high school, I had accepted certain truths about my family. My parents loved Derek more. My achievements would never matter. My dreams were not worth pursuing. These beliefs had settled into my bones like a permanent ache. What I did not know then was that the worst was yet to come. As I prepared to graduate and face the adult world, my parents would make decisions that would shape the next decade of my life. And the lies they would tell about me had not even begun. Graduation day arrived on a warm June afternoon. I walked across that stage in my blue cap and gown, collected my diploma, and felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. High school was over. Now I had applied to several colleges focusing on schools with strong graphic design programs. Art remained my passion despite years of dismissal from my parents. Mrs. Patterson had written me a glowing recommendation letter. My portfolio included dozens of original pieces that I had created over 6 years. I believed I had a real chance. The acceptance letters came, and with them came the financial reality. Tuition room and board art supplies and living expenses added up to numbers that made my stomach drop. I needed help, and there was only one place to ask. I approached my parents one evening after dinner. I had prepared a whole presentation about the return on investment of a design degree. I had statistics about job placement rates and starting salaries. I was ready to make my case. My father listened for about 30 seconds before interrupting. He told me that they had already committed their savings to Derek's graduate school. A master's degree in business administration from a top program was expensive. They simply could not support 2 children through higher education. I pointed out that Derek was 22 years old with a well-paying job. Could he not take out loans like most graduate students? My mother's face hardened. She said that Derek's future was too important to burden with debt. He was going to be somebody. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. I was not going to be somebody, so my education did not warrant the same investment. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I would leave Ohio. I would go somewhere new and build a life on my own terms. I would prove that I could succeed without their support, their approval, or their love. I had a friend named Casey from summer camp 3 years earlier. She lived in Austin, Texas, and worked at a marketing agency. I called her the next morning and asked if I could crash on her couch while I got on my feet. Casey said yes without hesitation. 3 weeks later, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and boarded a Greyhound bus heading south. Those first months in Austin were brutal. Casey's apartment was a 1-bedroom unit, and I slept on an air mattress in her living room. I applied for jobs everywhere. Retail stores, coffee shops, restaurants, anywhere that would hire someone with no experience and no connections. Finally, a Mexican restaurant called Casa Verde offered me a position as a waitress. The pay was minimum wage plus tips. The hours were long. My feet ached constantly. But I showed up every single shift with a smile on my face because this job meant survival. I rented a room in a house with 4 other people. My space was barely large enough for a twin bed and a small desk. The walls were thin. The bathroom was shared. The kitchen always smelled like whatever the guy in the back room was cooking, which usually involved a lot of garlic. But it was mine. I paid for it with money I earned myself, and that made it feel like a palace. During the day, I worked at Casa Verde. During the evenings and on my days off, I taught myself graphic design. I could not afford software subscriptions, so I used free trials and open source programs. I watched tutorial videos at the public library where the Wi-Fi was free. I practiced for hours creating fake logos for imaginary companies, designing mock advertisements, building a portfolio piece by piece. After about a year, I saved enough money to buy a used laptop. It was 5 years old and ran slowly, but it could handle basic design software. I set up a profile on a freelance website and started bidding on small projects. Logo designs for $25, business cards for $15, social media graphics for $10 apiece. The pay was terrible, but I was building experience and testimonials. Many clients tried to take advantage of me. Some demanded endless revisions. Others disappeared without paying. One man sent me angry messages at 2 a.m. because he did not like the shade of blue I chose. I learned to set boundaries, negotiate contracts, and spot red flags before accepting work. Slowly, my reputation grew. I raised my rates. I attracted better clients. After 2 years of grinding, a small technology startup offered me a full-time position as their in-house designer. The salary was modest by industry standards, but to me it felt like a fortune. I finally had health insurance, paid vacation, and a desk with my name on it. I moved into a proper one-bedroom apartment. It had a full kitchen, a bathroom I did not have to share, and a balcony overlooking a courtyard garden. I bought real furniture instead of secondhand pieces held together by hope and duct tape. For the first time since leaving Ohio, I felt like I was building something real. During all these years, I kept minimal contact with my family. I called on Christmas and Mother's Day out of obligation. The conversations never lasted more than 10 minutes. My mother asked superficial questions about the weather in Texas. My father occasionally grunted hello in the background. Derek was always too busy to come to the phone. What I did not know was that back in Ohio, my parents were telling a very different story about my life. It started small. At a cousin's birthday party, Diane mentioned that Zoe was struggling in Texas. At Thanksgiving dinner, she elaborated that they had to send me money occasionally to keep me afloat. By the following year, the narrative had solidified into something almost unrecognizable. According to my parents, I had failed to launch. I worked dead-end jobs and could not hold a position for more than a few months. I lived in squalor. I constantly asked them for handouts. Without their financial support, I would probably be homeless. They told these lies to aunts and uncles, to neighbors and church friends, to anyone who asked about their younger child, and everyone believed them. Why would parents lie about something so sad? The first time I discovered the truth was during a phone call from my Aunt Brenda. She was my father's sister, a kind woman who always slipped me extra dessert at family dinners when I was little. Her voice carried so much pity that I almost did not recognize it. She asked if I was doing okay, really okay. She said she knew things were hard and that I should not be ashamed to accept help. She mentioned that she could send a little money if I needed it. My parents had told her I was struggling badly. I sat in my new apartment surrounded by furniture I had purchased with my own salary and told her that I was fine. More than fine, actually. I had a good job at a tech company. I was completely self-sufficient. I had not asked my parents for a single dollar since leaving home. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Brenda sounded confused. She said that was strange because Diane had just told the family that they sent me $500 last month for rent. I felt the blood drain from my face. I thanked Brenda for checking on me and ended the call as politely as I could. Then I sat on my couch and tried to process what I had just learned. My parents were lying about me. Not small exaggerations or minor embellishments. Complete fabrications designed to make me look like a failure. And they had been doing this for years, so I did nothing. I went back to work. I continued growing my career. I pushed the phone call with Brenda to the back of my mind and tried to forget that my parents were out there dismantling my reputation, one family gathering at a time. I told myself it did not matter. I knew the truth. The people who mattered in my life knew the truth. Let my parents tell their stories to relatives I barely saw. What difference did it make? But lies have a way of catching up with everyone. And the truth has a way of demanding to be heard. 3 years into my time at the startup, my life took an unexpected turn. The company had grown significantly, and we were attending a technology conference in downtown Austin. I was there to network and represent our design team. I had no idea I was about to meet the man who would change everything. The conference center was packed with entrepreneurs and engineers and investors milling about with name tags and coffee cups. I was standing in line at the refreshment table during an afternoon break when someone bumped into me from behind. Hot coffee splashed across my white blouse, leaving a brown stain spreading across the fabric. I turned around to see a tall man with warm brown eyes looking absolutely mortified. He apologized profusely, his words tumbling over each other, as he grabbed napkins from the table and tried to help blot the stain. His name tag read Marcus Thompson, and his company was a cybersecurity firm I had heard mentioned in tech news. I told him it was fine, really just an accident. He insisted on buying me a replacement drink and offered to pay for dry cleaning. There was something genuine about his embarrassment that made me laugh instead of getting annoyed. We ended up talking for the rest of the break, and when the sessions resumed, he asked for my phone number. I gave it to him expecting maybe a polite follow-up text, and nothing more. But Marcus surprised me. He called the next day, not texted, called. He asked if I would like to have dinner that weekend, his treat as a proper apology for ruining my blouse. Our first date was at a small Vietnamese restaurant tucked away on a side street I had never noticed before. The tables were close together, and the lighting was dim, and the walls were covered with framed photographs of Saigon. We ordered pho and spring rolls and talked for 4 hours straight. Marcus told me about his journey into cybersecurity after watching his grandmother lose her life savings to an online scam. He spoke about his parents both gone now and how their deaths when he was in his 20s forced him to grow up faster than he expected. He asked about my life, my work, my passions. He actually listened to my answer instead of waiting for his turn to speak. By the end of that dinner, I knew Marcus was different. Most men I had dated seemed to view conversation as a competitive sport. Marcus approached it like a collaboration. He was curious about my thoughts and opinions. He remembered small details I mentioned and asked follow-up questions. He made me feel seen in a way I had rarely experienced. Our relationship developed slowly but steadily. We went on more dinners, then movies, then hikes around the lake on weekend mornings. Marcus met my friends from work. I met his small circle of close buddies he had known since college. Our lives began weaving together naturally without force or friction. After about 6 months of dating, I finally told Marcus about my family. We were sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset, and the conversation drifted to childhood memories. I hesitated at first, worried that my baggage might scare him away, but something in his patient silence told me he could handle it. I told him about Derek and the constant comparisons, about the certificate my mother dismissed and the dreams my father ignored, about leaving Ohio with nothing but 2 suitcases and determination, about building my career from scratch while my parents told everyone I was a failure living off their charity. Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he reached over and took my hand. He said that he understood now why I worked so hard and why I sometimes seemed surprised when he praised my accomplishments. He told me I was one of the strongest people he had ever met. He said that what I had overcome made him admire me even more. That night, something shifted between us. I had shown him my wounds, and instead of backing away, he moved closer. I started to believe that maybe I deserved this kind of love. Maybe I was worthy of being chosen and cherished. Meanwhile, my career continued its upward trajectory. I had been promoted to design lead, at the startup managing a small team of junior designers. But after 5 years with the company, I felt ready for a bigger challenge. I wanted to build something of my own. I spent months planning in secret. I researched the market, identified potential clients, saved money for initial expenses. Finally, I took the leap. I resigned from my job and launched Zenith Creative, my own graphic design studio. The first year was terrifying. I had traded a steady paycheck for complete uncertainty. Some months I barely covered my expenses. Other months I landed a big contract and felt invincible. Through it all, Marcus remained my rock. He helped me build my website, connected me with contacts in the tech industry, and talked me through the anxiety attacks at 3 a.m. By the second year, Zenith Creative had found its footing. I had regular clients ranging from small businesses to mid-sized technology companies. I hired a part-time assistant to help with administrative tasks. The revenue was not making me rich, but it was growing steadily month after month. Marcus witnessed every step of this journey. He saw me reject work that did not align with my values. He watched me put in 16-hour days to meet deadlines. He celebrated with me when I landed my biggest contract and comforted me when I lost a client I thought was locked in. He knew exactly how hard I worked for everything I had. One evening, about 2 years into our relationship, Marcus took me to Mount Bunnell. It was our favorite spot overlooking the Colorado River. The sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. We had hiked up here dozens of times, but something about this evening felt different. At the top, Marcus turned to face me. He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket and dropped to one knee. The words he spoke blurred together through my tears, but I caught enough. Would I spend the rest of my life with him? Would I be his partner in everything I said yes before he even finished asking? We stayed on that hilltop until the stars came out holding each other and laughing and crying and planning our future. For the first time in my life, I felt completely secure in being loved. There was only one shadow over my happiness. Getting married meant inviting family, and that meant confronting the lies my parents had been spreading for years. Planning a wedding should be one of the happiest times in a person's life. For me, it came with a weight of dread that I could not shake. Marcus and I discussed the guest list early in our engagement. His side was straightforward. He had lost both parents years ago, but he wanted to invite a handful of close friends and some extended relatives he remained in touch with. Simple and uncomplicated. My side was anything but simple. I had built a life in Austin completely separate from my Ohio roots. My friends here, my colleagues, my clients. These were the people who knew the real me. But there was also my family, my parents and Derek, aunts and uncles and cousins, who had heard years of lies about my supposed failures. But Marcus had a different perspective. He said that whatever I decided he would support completely. But he also gently suggested that excluding family entirely might leave me with regrets. This was a chance to show them who I really was. This was an opportunity for truth. After weeks of internal debate, I sent invitations to Ohio, to my parents, to Derek, to Aunt Brenda, and a few other relatives I still cared about despite the distance. I kept the notes brief and formal. No warm sentiments, just the basic information they needed to attend. My mother called 2 days after receiving the invitation. Her tone was surprised, almost suspicious. She asked when I had gotten engaged and why they were only hearing about it now. She wanted to know who this Marcus person was, and what kind of family he came from, and whether he had a stable career. I answered her questions with short sentences. Yes, he was a software engineer. Yes, he had a good job. No, his parents were no longer living. I did not offer details about how we met or how much I loved him. Those intimate stories felt too precious to share with someone who had spent years telling lies about me. Diane announced that she and Harold and Derek would fly to Austin a week before the wedding to help with preparations. I wanted to refuse, but I could not think of a polite way to do so. Instead, I braced myself for the invasion. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I picked them up from the airport in the car I had purchased with money from my business, though I did not mention that detail. The ride to their hotel was filled with awkward small talk about the flight and the weather. That first dinner set the tone for the entire visit. We met at a steakhouse downtown, all 5 of us crowded around a table. Derek spent most of the meal on his phone, occasionally looking up to mention something about his own life, his new corner office, his recent promotion, his plans to buy a vacation property. My mother used the dinner to interrogate Marcus. She asked about his education, his salary range, his career trajectory. She wanted to know why a man his age was not already married. Had something been wrong with previous relationships? Marcus answered everything with patient politeness, but I could see the tension in his jaw. Throughout the meal, Diane made small comments designed to undermine me, without being overtly hostile. She mentioned to Marcus that Zoe had always been the artistic one in the family, emphasizing artistic in a way that made it sound like a character flaw. She noted that I had run away from Ohio as soon as I graduated, as if leaving home to build my own life was something shameful. Harold barely spoke. He nodded along with whatever his wife said and occasionally asked Derek about work. I might as well have been a stranger at the table. After dinner, Marcus and I drove back to my apartment in silence. He was the first to speak. He said that now he understood everything I had told him about my childhood. Watching my parents in action had made it real in a way that stories alone could not convey. The week continued in the same pattern. My mother found fault with every wedding decision I had made. The venue was too small for a proper celebration. The flowers I had chosen were boring. The menu did not include enough traditional options. Why had I not hired a live band instead of a DJ? I reminded her that Marcus and I were paying for this wedding ourselves. Every single expense came from our savings. We had chosen what we could afford and what reflected our tastes as a couple. Diane's response was a tight smile and a comment that some things were worth going into debt for. After all, you only get married once. Usually, that word usually dripped with implication, as if she already expected my marriage to fail. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I overheard my mother on the phone with someone back in Ohio. She was recounting her trip so far, and I heard my name mentioned with that familiar, dismissive tone. She said that Zoe's little wedding was fine, nothing special. She mentioned that the groom seemed nice enough, though his family situation was concerning. No parents, no real connections. She speculated that Marcus was probably marrying me because he had no better options. I stood frozen in the hallway outside her hotel room door, my hand raised to knock my entire body cold with fury, but I did not confront her. Instead, I walked away and returned to my apartment where Marcus was waiting. He took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. I told him what I had heard. His expression shifted from concern to something harder, something I had rarely seen in him: determination. He said that tomorrow was the rehearsal dinner. After that would be our wedding day. He promised me that before this was all over, everyone would know the truth. He asked me to trust him. I did trust him, completely. I went to sleep that night not knowing what he planned, but feeling certain that whatever happened, I would not face it alone. The rehearsal dinner was held at a farm-to-table restaurant Marcus had discovered. Both families in the wedding party gathered around long wooden tables decorated with wildflowers. The atmosphere should have been warm and celebratory. Instead, my mother found opportunities to make comments just loud enough for others to hear. When one of my bridesmaids mentioned that she worked at Zenith Creative, Diane looked puzzled and asked what that was. I explained that it was my company, the design studio I had built from scratch. Diane laughed lightly and said, "Oh right, your little art thing." Then she turned to my bridesmaid and added in a stage whisper that Zoe had always been creative, but never very practical. They had helped her out so much over the years. My face burned. I opened my mouth to respond, but Marcus squeezed my knee under the table. A silent message. Not yet. After the dinner back at our apartment, I finally broke down. I asked Marcus why we had to endure this. Why should I let them continue spreading lies at my own wedding? Why could I not just tell everyone the truth right now? Marcus held me and let me cry. Then he explained his plan. He was going to give a speech at the wedding reception, as grooms traditionally do. But his speech would not be ordinary. He was going to tell our story, the real story, the one my parents had worked so hard to bury. I was terrified. I imagined the confrontation, the accusations, the scene it would create. But Marcus was calm and certain. He said that the truth deserved to be spoken in front of everyone who had believed the lies. He asked me one more time to trust him. I said yes. And then I went to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would change everything. I woke on my wedding day to sunlight streaming through the curtains and a feeling of electric anticipation coursing through my body. This was the day I had dreamed about for years, the day I would marry the man who saw me clearly and loved me anyway. But it was also the day when years of secrets and lies would finally be exposed. My bridesmaids arrived early to help me prepare. We gathered in the bridal suite at the venue, a converted barn on the outskirts of Austin, surrounded by wildflower meadows and ancient oak trees. Hairstylists and makeup artists transformed us while champagne flowed and laughter filled the air. Looking in the mirror at my finished reflection, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back wore an elegant ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves. Her hair was swept up in soft curls, with tiny flowers woven through. Her eyes looked calm, despite the storm brewing inside. This was it. No turning back now. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon. Guests began arriving around 3:30, signing the guest book and finding their seats in the rows of white chairs arranged beneath a wooden arch draped with greenery. I watched from a window as cars pulled into the gravel parking area and people in their finest clothes stepped out. I spotted my parents arriving in a rental car. Diane wore a navy blue dress and a hat that seemed designed to draw attention. Harold followed behind in a suit that looked slightly too tight. Derek brought a girlfriend no one had mentioned before, a blonde woman in a red dress that seemed inappropriate for a wedding. Watching them walk toward the ceremony space, I felt a strange detachment. These people were my family by blood, but they had never felt like home. Home was here now in Austin with the friends who supported me and the man waiting for me at the altar. The ceremony began exactly on time. The string quartet played as my bridesmaids walked down the aisle one by one. Then the music shifted to the bridal march, and it was my turn. I had made a deliberate choice about this moment. Traditionally, the father walks the bride down the aisle and gives her away, but I would not be given away by a man who had never truly claimed me in the first place. I chose to walk alone. Every step down that aisle represented my journey. The little girl dismissed in her own home, the teenager who found solace in art, the young woman who left everything she knew to build a new life, the business owner who created something from nothing. I walked alone because I had made myself who I was, without their help, without their approval. Marcus stood at the altar with tears in his eyes as I approached. When I reached him, he took my hands and whispered that I was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. I believed him. Our vows were personal and honest. I promised to stand beside him through every challenge, to celebrate his victories and comfort his defeats, to build a life filled with laughter and love and endless growth. He promised to see me fully, to support my dreams, to be my partner in every sense of the word. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Marcus kissed me with such tenderness that I forgot anyone else was watching. For that moment, it was just the two of us beginning our forever. The reception transformed the barn into a magical space. String lights hung from the rafters. Tables were decorated with candles and wildflowers. A live band played as guests found their seats, and servers circulated with appetizers and drinks. I tried to enjoy the celebration, but part of me was waiting, watching the schedule, knowing that the speeches were coming, wondering what would happen when Marcus finally stood to speak. The toasts began during dinner. My maid of honor gave a speech about our friendship and how she had watched me grow and transform over the years we had known each other. She praised my strength, my creativity, my determination to build a life on my own terms. The crowd applauded warmly. The best man spoke next, sharing funny stories about Marcus and expressing how happy he was to see his friend find true love. More applause, more laughter, more champagne toasts. Then the DJ announced that the groom wanted to say a few words. Marcus stood from his seat beside me and walked to the microphone stand at the front of the room. The barn fell silent as 120 people turned their attention to him. He began traditionally enough. He thanked everyone for coming to celebrate our marriage. He expressed gratitude for the love and support we had received from friends and colleagues. He talked about falling in love with me, about our first date, about the moment he knew he wanted to spend his life with me. The audience smiled and nodded along. This was what they expected from a groom's speech: sentimental stories and romantic declarations. Then Marcus paused. His expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. He said that before he finished, there was something important he needed to address, something that had been bothering him all week. I felt my heart rate accelerate. Here it came. Marcus said he had heard some stories this week about the woman he married. He had heard that she was a failure who could not support herself. He had heard that her parents had to send her money regularly just to keep her off the streets. He had heard that she was directionless, talentless, dependent on handouts. The room went completely silent. I saw my mother's face tighten. Harold shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Derek glanced toward the exit as if calculating an escape route. Marcus continued speaking, his voice calm, but carrying to every corner of the room. He said that he wanted to tell everyone the truth about the woman he fell in love with. He explained how I left Ohio at 18, with nothing but 2 suitcases and determination. How I worked as a waitress to pay rent while teaching myself design skills at night. How I built a freelance career from 0 clients to a steady stream of work through nothing but talent and persistence. He pulled papers from his jacket pocket, documents he had gathered. He held up a printout showing Zenith Creative's website and client list. He mentioned contract values and annual revenue figures that made several people in the audience gasp quietly. He held up a magazine clipping, Austin Monthly's annual list of 30 designers under 30. My name appeared on page 47, complete with a photograph and feature article about my journey from self-taught artist to successful business owner. He held up screenshots of testimonials from clients praising my work, my professionalism, my creative vision, and then Marcus looked directly at my parents' table. His voice remained steady as he asked them a question. He asked if they had ever actually asked their daughter about her life. Had they ever shown curiosity about what she was building? Or were they too busy telling everyone else fiction to notice the truth standing right in front of them? Diane's face had turned red. Harold stared at the floor. The relatives from Ohio looked at my parents with new expressions, confusion mixing with something that looked like dawning realization. Marcus said he was not trying to create conflict at their wedding. He simply could not let the lies continue unchallenged. The woman he married deserved to have her accomplishments acknowledged. She deserved to be seen for who she actually was, not who others had decided she should be. He turned back toward me, his eyes soft again after the steel of the previous moment. He said that I was the strongest, most resilient person he had ever known, that he would spend the rest of his life making sure I knew how much I was valued, that he considered himself the luckiest man in the world to call me his wife. The room erupted in applause. Not polite, restrained clapping, but genuine standing ovation applause. My colleagues from Austin who knew my story, friends who had watched me build my business from nothing, even some of the Ohio relatives who were learning the truth for the first time. I stood and walked to Marcus, pulling him into an embrace, while tears streamed down my face. These were not tears of sadness or shame. These were tears of release. Years of carrying the weight of my parents' lies finally lifted in front of everyone who mattered. When the applause finally faded and we returned to our seats, the party resumed with renewed energy. The band played, people danced, champagne continued flowing. But at the table where my parents sat, there was no celebration. Diane sat rigid and silent. Harold kept his eyes down. Derek had disappeared, probably to the bar or the parking lot, or anywhere that was not this room full of people who now knew the truth about his perfect family. The celebration continued around us, but I could not fully relax. I knew a confrontation was coming. You cannot drop a truth bomb like Marcus did and expect everyone to pretend nothing happened. About an hour after the speeches, I noticed my mother stand and walk toward the French doors that led to the garden. She glanced back at me with a look that was clearly a summons. I excused myself from the conversation I was having and followed her outside. The garden was quiet compared to the festivities inside. Strings of lights illuminated pathways between flower beds, and the distant sound of music drifted through the air. Diane stood near a fountain, her arms crossed her face, tight with anger. She spoke first, not bothering with preliminaries. She demanded to know how I could let Marcus humiliate them in front of the entire family. She said that whatever I thought they had done this was unforgivable. Standing there while he said those things, letting him call them liars in front of everyone they knew, I took a breath and kept my voice steady. I pointed out that he did not call them liars. He simply told the truth about my life that they had never bothered to learn because they were too busy inventing a different story. Diane scoffed. She claimed they were worried about me. They told family that I was struggling because they thought I was struggling. They were trying to explain why I never came home, why I never visited, why I seemed to have cut them off. I asked her when she had ever actually asked about my life. When had she called to see how my business was doing? When had she shown interest in anything I had built? The answer was never. She assumed I was failing because she could not imagine me succeeding. My mother's expression flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw something like recognition behind her eyes. But then the walls went back up. She said I had always been sensitive. I had always exaggerated slights and invented grievances. This was just like me making myself the victim. I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had wanted my mother to acknowledge what she had done. I had fantasized about this confrontation, imagining that the right words would unlock some hidden well of maternal love. But standing there in the garden on my wedding night, I realized the truth. I could not force her to see me. I could only see myself clearly. I told her that I was not a victim. I was someone who had built a life despite being ignored and dismissed by my own parents. I was not angry anymore. I had let go of the anger years ago because carrying it was exhausting. But I also would not pretend that everything was fine when it was not. I explained what I needed if we were going to have any relationship going forward. I needed them to stop lying about me to relatives. I needed them to actually ask about my life instead of assuming they knew it. I needed them to treat me with the same respect they showed Derek. If they could do those things, I was willing to try building something new. If they could not, I would continue living my life without them just as I had for the past decade. Diane stared at me as if seeing a stranger. This was not the meek approval-seeking daughter she remembered. This was someone who had grown into her power, who no longer needed parental validation to feel worthy. Before she could respond, my father appeared in the doorway. He had overheard at least part of the conversation. His face looked older than I remembered, drawn with something that might have been shame. Harold spoke quietly. He said he did not know what to say. He admitted that they had told stories about me that were not true. At first, it was small things. Then the stories grew. It became easier to believe what they were saying than to admit they did not really know their daughter anymore. This was the closest thing to an apology I had ever heard from my father. It was not enough, not nearly enough, but it was more than I expected. I told them both that I appreciated his honesty. But words were just words. Actions over time would show whether they were serious about changing. For now, I had a celebration to return to, and a husband waiting for me. I walked back toward the barn without looking back. Whatever they decided to do with what I had said, that was their choice. I had said my piece. The rest was up to them. Inside, Marcus was waiting near the door. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was more than okay. I was free. We danced the rest of the night surrounded by people who loved us. When the band played the last song and the guests began saying their goodbyes, I felt a lightness I had not experienced in years. The secret was out. The truth had been spoken. Whatever came next, I would face it without the weight of lies pressing down on me. As we prepared to leave for our honeymoon suite, Derek approached me. He looked uncomfortable, shuffling his feet like a teenager, instead of the confident executive he usually presented to the world. He said he wanted to talk. Not right now, he understood I had other things to focus on. But sometime, he admitted that he had not been a good brother. He had enjoyed being the favorite too much to question what that meant for me. He was ashamed of what he had just learned about what our parents had been saying. I looked at my brother, really looked at him for the first time in years. Behind the polished exterior was someone grappling with uncomfortable truths. Maybe there was hope for us after all. I told him I would like that. A real conversation, not just small talk at holidays. A chance to actually know each other as adults. He nodded, and for a moment something like warmth passed between us. Then Marcus took my hand and led me toward the exit. Our guest threw flower petals as we ran to the car, waiting to take us away. I climbed in beside my husband, my partner, my champion, and watched the venue disappear in the rearview mirror. That night, I fell asleep feeling more whole than I had in my entire life. Marcus and I spent 2 weeks in Costa Rica for our honeymoon. We hiked through rainforests and swam in hidden waterfalls, and watched sunsets from our private balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Away from family drama and business responsibilities, we simply existed together, learning the rhythms of married life. During those quiet days, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened, not with anger or sadness, but with a kind of peaceful clarity. The wedding had been a turning point, a line in the sand between the person I used to be and the person I was becoming. When we returned to Austin, life resumed its normal pace. I threw myself back into Zenith Creative with renewed energy. Within months, I hired 2 full-time designers to join my team. Our client list expanded to include national brands. Revenue grew beyond anything I had imagined when I first launched the company. Meanwhile, something unexpected began happening with my family. About a month after the wedding, my mother called. Not to criticize or complain, but to ask about my work. The conversation was awkward and stilted, full of long pauses and careful word choices. But she was trying. These calls continued sporadically. Diane asking about my clients. Harold occasionally getting on the phone to inquire about Austin weather or local news. Small steps in an unfamiliar direction. Derek and I started texting regularly. He sent me articles about design trends he thought I might find interesting. I sent him photos from my studio and updates about projects I was proud of. We planned a visit where he would come to Austin for a weekend without our parents, just the 2 of us getting to know each other as adults. Progress was slow and imperfect. There were still moments when old patterns emerged. A passive-aggressive comment from my mother, a thoughtless comparison from my father. But I had learned to address these moments directly, instead of swallowing the hurt. I also learned that healing does not happen in a straight line. Some days I felt completely at peace with my past. Other days, old wounds ached as if freshly inflicted. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and childhood emotional neglect. Working through decades of pain took time, but I was committed to the process. Throughout all of this, Marcus remained my anchor. He celebrated my victories and held space for my struggles. He never made me feel weak for crying about things that happened years ago. He understood that processing the past was part of building a healthy future. A year after our wedding, Zenith Creative was featured in a national business magazine as one of the top women-owned design firms in the Southwest. I was invited to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship and building creative businesses. My Austin monthly feature expanded into regular columns about design and business strategy. I sent copies of every article to my parents, not as revenge or proof, but as invitations into my real life. Sometimes they responded with brief acknowledgments, other times silence, but I kept sending them because the person I wanted to be did not hold back out of spite. My relationship with Derek transformed into something genuine. During his visit to Austin, we spent hours talking about our childhood from our different perspectives. He admitted that he never realized how much the favoritism affected me because he was too busy enjoying its benefits. I admitted that I had resented him for years before understanding that he was also a product of our parents' dysfunction. We agreed to build something new together, not the shallow sibling relationship of obligatory holiday cards and surface-level conversations, a real connection based on honesty and mutual respect. Aunt Brenda became an unexpected ally. After the wedding revelation, she reached out to apologize for believing the lies about me. She had felt something was wrong, but trusted my parents' version instead of following her instincts. Now she called regularly, genuinely interested in my life and proud of my accomplishments. 2 years after the wedding, Marcus and I bought a house in a quiet neighborhood outside Austin. It had a large backyard for the dog we planned to adopt and a room that could become a nursery someday. We were building the life we wanted, piece by piece, day by day. Standing in my home office on the morning of our second wedding anniversary, I looked around at everything I had created. The awards on the shelf, the framed magazine covers, the computer where I ran a company that employed 5 people and served clients across the country. None of this would have been possible if I had stayed in Ohio waiting for my parents to notice me. Every achievement represented a choice to move forward instead of staying stuck in resentment. Every success was built on the foundation of believing in myself when no one else did. I thought about the little girl who won second place in a writing contest and cried alone in her room. I wished I could go back and tell her that the people who should love you most do not always know how, that their failures say nothing about your worth, that someday she would stand in a room full of people who saw her clearly and valued her completely. But I could not change the past. I could only shape the future. And the future I was building was more beautiful than anything that little girl could have imagined. The most important lesson I learned through this entire journey is that you do not need permission to become who you are meant to be. Not from parents, not from family, not from anyone who cannot see your potential. The people who truly love you will celebrate your growth even when it surprises them. And the people who cannot handle your success were never really on your side to begin with. Validation from others feels wonderful when it comes, but the only validation that truly matters is the kind you give yourself. When you know your worth, when you honor your efforts, when you acknowledge your victories no matter how small, you become untouchable. No one can take away what you have given yourself. If you are watching this and feeling unseen by your own family, I want you to know that your story is not over. The people who doubt you today may not be the people who celebrate you tomorrow. Keep building, keep growing, keep moving toward the life you deserve. And someday, when the truth comes out, you will be standing exactly where you should be, ready, worthy, free. I want to thank you for joining me through this journey today. Your presence here means more than you know. Now I have a question for you. Have you ever experienced a moment where the truth about your life finally came out and changed how others saw you? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else who is going through something similar. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to join our community of people who believe in the power of truth and resilience. May you always have the courage to be yourself, even when the people closest to you cannot see who you really are. May you find your Marcus, whether that is a partner or a friend, or simply your own inner voice who speaks the truth when you cannot. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.